With the Second World War came the sharp realization that a man in the army is as good as the food he eats, asking the cooperation of the men themselves to take new note of what they are eating.
Food for thought takes on a whole new meaning when it comes to the peculiar culinary creations served to soldiers in the field. Imagine trudging through the scorching desert or trekking through the dense jungle, exhausted and famished, with no end in sight. However, the military, renowned for their bravery on the battlefield, have also been culinary pioneers, revolutionizing food preservation and innovation. But what is the truth behind the mysterious MREs? What did Napoleon Bonaparte say about food that changed everything? Join us as we delve into the weird food soldiers eat. Appetite for war, Napoleon and his men fell on their empty bellies. On the bicentennial of the Battle of Waterloo, Napoleon Bonaparte's most celebrated statement about food and warfare, "An army marches on its stomach," is worth recalling. This quote is so strongly tied to Napoleon that it's become familiar to just about everybody all over the world. Except there is no record of him saying it. Just as there is no record of Marie Antoinette saying, "Let them eat cake." If he did say it, the words would have been as hollow as the stomachs of his soldiers. Napoleon surprisingly appears to have cared little for food himself, and his apathy toward it often extended to his army too. His orders for the Grande Armée's rations were ample enough. Soup, boiled beef, a roasted joint, and some vegetables. No dessert. But bad roads and poor weather often prevented supply wagons from reaching campsites in time. During the Italian campaign, in which the 27-year-old Napoleon made his name as a general by defeating a much larger Austrian army and its allies, his men simply foraged off the land or plundered nearby villages, a common military practice then. Even while fighting the Russians in a poor country like Poland, conditions, though difficult, still allowed for humor. One day, as Napoleon passed a column of infantry, a hungry soldier cried out, "Papa, bread!" He shot back. The whole column burst into shouts of laughter, and no further request was made. But the suffering Napoleon's army underwent on his hottest and coldest campaigns in Egypt and Russia was no laughing matter. The 1798 Egyptian misadventure was launched with such speed and secrecy. For Napoleon, on the path to power, there was no time even to issue water canteens. As a result, the 55,000-strong army had to endure a 3-day march from Alexandria to Cairo, through burning sands, in thick European uniforms and carrying heavy armor. Thinking they would be able to forage like they had in Italy, many had thrown away their hard biscuits. Scores died of heat and thirst, while others, driven mad by hunger, thirst, sandstorms, and Bedouin attacks, simply put a bullet through their own brains. When the army reached the Nile, there was water and food. But, furious and embittered, the men went on a killing and looting rampage. Despite this harrowing tutorial in thirst, Napoleon embarked the very next year on an even more foolhardy 10-day march from Cairo to Syria. Again, there wasn't enough food. Water, carried in goatskins on camelback, was, according to one sergeant, hot, disagreeable, and dirty, like water from a cobbler's tub. And soldiers began to commit suicide. A stampede at a solitary well killed 30. The desperate men dug sea sorrel, ate it, and developed dysentery. Equally grotesque was the 1812 Russia campaign. The Grande Armée was annihilated more by starvation and cold than by the Cossacks. With absolutely no food supplies and temperatures at 20 below zero, the ravenous men ate horseflesh seasoned with gunpowder, often fighting over a fallen horse's flank to tear out its liver, sometimes even before ascertaining whether the animal had died. Through the campaign, flocks of buzzards feasted on corpses of soldiers on the roads and battlefields. True, Napoleon was an indifferent eater, though fastidious about bread. He often skipped meals, eating only when hungry, and usually calling for roast chicken, a dish he seems to have enjoyed. In the kitchens of his Tuileries palace at Paris, chickens were constantly roasted on spits to suit his erratic hunger pangs. When he rode out of Cairo on Christmas Eve to survey the Suez Isthmus, the only provisions he took were 3 roasted chickens wrapped in paper. Only after his defeat at Waterloo, when he had been permanently stripped of power, did Napoleon seem to revel in its mealtime trappings. On the island of St. Helena, as a prisoner of the British, he was served dinner every night by a uniformed butler who announced, "His Majesty is served." As footmen served soups, entrees, roasts, side dishes, and sweets on rare porcelain and silver plates, Napoleon, surrounded by a small group of officers in full-dress uniform, with their wives in décolleté dresses, played the part of the emperor he no longer was. What a change from the man who had bolted his breakfast in 8 minutes, and dinner in 12. He normally ate his breakfast alone, but on that fateful, rain-soaked morning of June 18, 1815, he called what came to be known as his breakfast conference, Nicolas Appert, from jars to canisters. In 1795, the French government offered a prize of 12,000 francs for a method of preserving food for use by the army and navy. Chef Nicolas Appert began experimenting in his workshop at Massy, near Paris, and in 1810 was awarded the prize for his method of packing food in bottles, corking them, and submerging them in boiling water to stop spoilage. The method is based on the idea that heat destroys or neutralizes the ferments that cause food spoilage. With his prize money, Appert opened the world's first commercial cannery. The glass jar concept was replaced with tin or wrought iron canisters, later shortened to cans, which were both cheaper to make and easier to transport. Until can openers were invented, soldiers would pierce the cans open with bayonets or smash them open with rocks. The meal is ready to eat. Food is always a concern. The army marches on its stomach is a phrase that might be credited to Napoleon, but the need to feed a military on the move is a timeless concern. The meal ready to eat is a self-contained individual United States military ration used by the United States Armed Forces and Department of Defense. It is intended for use by American service members in combat or field conditions, where other food is not available. MREs have also been distributed to civilians as humanitarian daily rations during natural disasters and wars. The MRE replaced the canned meal, combat, individual in 1981. But it all started somewhere. The first American military ration established by a congressional resolution during the Revolutionary War consisted of enough food to feed a man for 1 day, mostly beef, peas, and rice. During the Civil War, the U.S. military moved toward canned goods. Later, self-contained kits were issued as a whole ration and contained canned meat, bread, coffee, sugar, and salt. During World War I, canned meats were replaced with lightweight preserved meats to save weight and allow more rations to be carried by soldiers on foot. At the beginning of World War II, a number of new field rations were introduced, including the mountain ration and the jungle ration. Cost-cutting measures by quartermaster command officials during the latter part of World War II and the Korean War again saw the predominance of heavy canned sea rations issued to troops, regardless of operating environment or mission. During World War II, over 100 million cans of Spam were sent to the Pacific. During the Vietnam War, problems with the canned MCI rations became apparent. MCI cans were heavy and bulky. They could not fit easily in a uniform pocket and could even cause injury. The cans could also corrode in the tropical environment and cause the food to spoil. After the food was consumed, the empty cans were difficult to dispose of. The littered cans were sometimes fashioned into booby traps by the enemy. Finally, the MCI rations had an estimated shelf life of 24 months at 21 degrees Celsius, which was found to be inadequate, as supply was often interrupted by weather and enemy activity. After repeated experiences with providing prepared rations to soldiers dating from before World War II, Pentagon officials ultimately realized that simply providing a nutritionally balanced meal in the field was not adequate. Service members in various geographic regions and combat situations often require different subsets of ingredients for food to be considered palatable over long periods. Catering to individual tastes and preferences would encourage service members to actually consume the whole ration and its nutrition. Most importantly, the use of specialized forces in extreme environments and the necessity of carrying increasingly heavy field loads while on foot during long missions required significantly lighter alternatives to standard canned wet rations. In 1963, the DoD began developing the meal ready to eat, a ration that would rely on modern food preparation and packaging technology to create a lighter replacement for the canned MCI. In 1966, this led to the long-range patrol ration, a dehydrated meal stored in a waterproof canvas pouch. As with the jungle ration, its expense compared to canned wet rations, as well as the costs of stocking and storing a specialized field ration, led to its limited usage and repeated attempts at discontinuance by quartermaster command officials. The MRE continuous development. After the introduction of the MRE, service members often heated the food by boiling them in a canteen cup over a lit fuel source. This was slow, especially in cold weather. It also produced a visible flame that was undesirable at night. Service members strongly desired a more convenient way to heat the food. Between 1988 to 1989, development and testing was conducted for a new flameless ration heater. In 1990, the flameless ration heater was introduced. In an array of field tests and surveys, service members requested more entree options and larger serving sizes. By 1994, commercial light graphics were added to make the packets more user-friendly and appealing, while biodegradable materials were introduced for inedible components, such as spoons and napkins. The number of main dishes expanded to 16 by 1996, including vegetarian options, 20 by 1997, and 24 by 1998. As of 2023, the system includes 24 entrees and more than 150 additional items. The variety allowed service members to trade them in order to find something palatable for various cultures and geographical regions. The ration originally came in a dark brown outer bag from 1981 to 1995 because it was designed for service in the temperate forests and plains of Central Europe. It was replaced in 1996 with a tan outer bag that was better suited for service in the deserts of the Middle East. By 2000, a bean burrito main dish was introduced. In 2006, beverage bags were introduced to the MRE, as service members have begun to depend more on hydration packs than on canteens, thus denying them the use of the metal canteen cups for mixing powdered beverages. In addition to having measuring marks to indicate levels of liquid for precise measurement, they can be sealed and placed inside the flameless heater. Most recently, MREs have been developed using the Dietary Reference Intake, created by the Institute of Medicine. The IOM indicated service members who were classified as highly active men between the ages of 18 and 30 typically burn about 4,200 calories a day, but tended to only consume about 2,400 calories a day during combat, entering a negative energy balance. This imbalance occurs when service members fail to consume full portions of their rations. Although manipulations to the food items and distribution of macronutrients to help boost the amount of kilocalories per MRE have been made, more studies are showing many service members still do not meet today's standards of daily consumption, often trading and discarding portions of the ration. Researchers continue to study the habits and eating preferences of service members, making constant changes that encourage service members to eat the entire meal and thus get full nutritional value. A small randomized controlled trial from 2017 confirms the nutritional balance of MRE eaten in whole using blood tests. The military has experimented with new assault ration prototypes, such as the First Strike ration and the Hua bar, designed with elite or specialized forces in mind. Lighter than the typical MRE, they require no preparation and allow service members to eat them while traveling. In July 2009, 6,300 dairy shake packets of varying flavors were recalled due to evidence of salmonella contamination. The MREs isn't just for the military. MREs have also been distributed to civilians during natural disasters. The National Guard has provided MREs to the public during national disasters, such as Hurricanes Katrina, Ike, Maria, and Sandy, and the 2011 super outbreak. The large number of civilians exposed to MREs prompted several jokes during the recent New Orleans Mardi Gras, with revelers donning clothing made of MRE packets with phrases such as Marie Antoinette, referring to Marie Antoinette, the wife of King Louis XVI, and man ready to eat. The use of rations for non-combat environments has been questioned. While the nutritional requirements are suitable for a combat environment where service members will burn many calories and lose much sodium through sweat, it has been provided as emergency food or even as a standard meal. The high fat, averaging about 52 grams of fat, 5 grams trans fats, and high salt content averaging about 2 grams, are less than ideal for sedentary situations. In the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, a 77-year-old civilian man with prior congestive heart failure ended up with volume overload from the high sodium content of MREs. It's not palatable, you can't eat it. Some of the early MRE main courses were not very palatable, earning them the nicknames meals rejected by everyone, meals rejected by Ethiopians during the 1983 to 1985 famine in Ethiopia, or meals rarely edible. Some individual portions had their own nicknames. For example, the Frankfurters, which came sealed in pouches of 4, were referred to as the 4 fingers of death. Although quality has improved over the years, many of the nicknames have stuck. MREs were sometimes called 3 lies for the price of 1. It's not a meal, it's not ready, and you can't eat it. As late as the 2010 deployment to Afghanistan, one veteran in November 2019 characterized MREs as accursed things. Their low dietary fiber content could cause constipation in some, so they were also known as meals requiring enemas, meals refusing to exit, meals refusing to excrete, or massive rectal expulsions. While the laxative effect of xylitol sweetener, if excessively consumed, may contribute to a myth that the gum found in MREs contains a laxative, the crackers in the ration pack do contain a higher than normal vegetable content to facilitate digestion. In December 2006, comedian Al Franken joked to troops in Iraq that he had his 5th MRE so far, and none of them had an exit strategy. By 2015, the average fiber content per pack of MRE has improved to an adequate 12 grams. A superstition exists among troops about the charms candies that come with some menus. They are considered bad luck, especially if actually eaten. In March 2007, the Salt Lake Tribune invited 3 gourmet chefs to taste test 18 MRE meals. None of the meals rated higher than a 5.7 average on a scale of 1 to 10, and the chicken fajita meal in particular was singled out for disdain, rating an average score of 1.3. In 2010, the New York Times reported that a French combat ration could be traded for around 5 MREs, though by 2014 it was claimed that MRE menus had improved to the point that their worth had reversed. The vegetable cheese omelet MRE, recipe number 4 introduced in 2005, is generally considered the worst ever. Soldiers serving in Iraq dubbed it the vomilet, a pun with vomit, both for its appearance and taste. It was discontinued in 2009. Before we continue, let's have our subscribers pick for today. Few military meals are as infamous as the vacuum-sealed hot dogs known as Frankfurter's Beef Menu 6. From 1993 to 2000, this MRE was notorious among service members for its impact on their digestive systems, earning the unflattering nickname, the 4 fingers of death. The meal consisted of 4 hot dogs, each roughly the size of a human finger, encased in airtight plastic. When opened, the hot dogs would plop out alongside a brownish-pink liquid, creating an unappealing first impression. These salty meat sticks were typically accompanied by Western beans, adding to the semblance of a makeshift barracks barbecue. The reputation of this meal was so bad that it even secured its own entry on Urban Dictionary, cementing its place in military lore. What are your thoughts on MREs like this? Please share in the comments section below. The best MREs of all time. Military MREs are a shared experience between the Army, Navy, Coast Guard, Marine Corps, Air Force, and even civilians. With several trials, while some have been ranked as utterly terrible and even earning ridiculous names, some have had better luck on the taste buds. Chili Mac is known for being the best MRE of all time. Despite the many jokes made at the expense of terrible MREs, this one has been a consistent favorite for many years. When it comes to MREs, simple is always better, which is why beef ravioli is a favorite among military personnel. The next is the beef stew, which is basically just chili and beans, with a few more vegetables. Good MREs are hard to come by, and this is one of the best. Chili with beans might look like brown sludge, but isn't that what all of the best MREs tend to look like? They're definitely the tastiest. The last one here is the shredded BBQ beef. This one has more mixed reviews than the others, but is still generally well liked. MREs are still better than dog food. No more complaining about MREs. Russian troops were fed dog food earlier to save money, it is being claimed. Labels reading premium quality beef covered up the real canine-destined contents, according to video footage shot by a whistleblower. A whistleblower in Russia's security force has released photos and videos of what he says are cans of dog food disguised as beef stew, which were allegedly fed to Interior Ministry troops. The person who sounded the alarm, a rarity in the security forces, is Igor Matveyev, a former major in Russia's interior force. He says the disguised dog food was served to soldiers for several months at his base in the eastern city of Vladivostok, in order to save money. The video he posted online apparently shows dog food cans covered up with labels reading premium quality beef among the stock of food in the base's storehouse. Russia's security forces have a long history of financial problems and corruption, and are currently undergoing unpopular reforms aimed at restructuring an outdated hierarchical structure. Dog food asides, what have soldiers eaten over the years? Soldiers' rations, through history, from live hogs to indestructible MREs. YouTube. While ancient Roman armies largely hunted their rations during war campaigns, modern soldiers now have access to pizza that can last as long as 3 years. As the saying goes, an army marches on its stomach, relying on good and plentiful food to fuel its ability to fight. For contemporary US armed forces in combat, that usually means meals ready to eat, or MREs. US armed forces switched to MREs in the early 1980s, replacing the much-derided canned rations that had sustained troops from World War II through most of the Vietnam War. In September 2018, a specially engineered pizza that can last 3 years was added to 20 available MRE options, as part of a larger strategy to improve morale and avoid something called menu fatigue. Throughout history, feeding troops has been a challenge for all of the greatest fighting forces, from the Roman legions to the hordes of Genghis Khan to Napoleon's chasseurs. But one way or another, they all found a way. Roman armies hunted everything that was available. Archaeological remains of wild animals show. From the limited evidence of what the administration in Rome provided the soldiers, the most important source of calories were carbohydrates, barley or wheat. One source says soldiers were given 1 pound of meat daily. For an army, you have to kill 120 sheep a day, just for the meat ration, or 60 hogs. Whatever the exact amount, it would not be enough to sustain a Roman soldier, who was a mule more than anything else. They carried very heavy gear, on bad roads, and that's when they were not expending calories fighting. With their food, they were given wine, a diluted version of what we're used to, or something closer to vinegar that would help reduce bacteria in their drinking water. For their supply of fat, Roman troops, unsurprisingly, looked to olive oil. During the Crusades, the average Christian soldier in a siege would have some dried meat and grain to make things like porridge. But this was the food they would have brought with them, supplemented with fruits and vegetables or cheese purchased locally. During the First Crusade, soldiers would have provided their own food stores, which they would have mortgaged their property or sold possessions to buy. Later, during crusades like those in the 14th century, called by Pope Innocent III, deals were made with the Venetian fleet and merchants to keep soldiers supplied. During battles, if crusaders got to the Muslim camp, they would stop fighting and start eating, and it would cost them the battle. It happened twice at the Siege of Acre. At one point in the Third Crusade, an observer noted several kitchens in the Sultan Saladin's camp, with up to 9 cauldrons each. Those cauldrons were substantial. You could fit 4 cows' heads in each. The Christian invaders had nothing comparable. The Mongol diet was not gourmet. In the early 13th century, when Genghis Khan was conquering swaths of Asia, mostly in the territory we now call China, his horde wasn't able to carry much. Warriors were supplied by their own households, and as territories were conquered, the Mongols came in contact with foodstuffs like wine. Their homegrown brand of liquor was fermented mare's milk called arag, or kumis. The Mongolian lands were not particularly arable, nor did the Mongols stay in one place for a long time, so fruits and vegetables weren't staples. The Mongols brought their herds of cows and sheep with them on campaigns. When herds were unavailable, the horsemen would hunt dogs, marmots and rabbits, or subsist on dried milk curd, cured meat, and both fresh and fermented mare's milk. At the height of its power, in the late 17th century, the Ottoman Empire was a massive horseshoe around the Mediterranean, including huge swaths of North Africa, the Middle East, modern-day Turkey, and Eastern Europe. The Janissaries, elite foot soldiers and bodyguards to the empire's sultan, are considered Europe's first modern standing army. Janissaries ate well. The soldiers were fueled with fresh baked bread, biscuit when bread was unavailable, a daily meat ration of lamb and mutton of approximately 200 grams, honey, coffee, rice, bulgur and barley for the horses. Above all, the biscuit appears to have held primacy in sustaining the soldiers. One observer noted 105 ovens in Istanbul that were solely dedicated to biscuit baking for the military. George Washington, along with his quartermaster and commissary general, had major problems feeding the Continental Army. Congress lacked taxing authority and thereby lacked the funds to purchase supplies. It was a problem compounded by transportation and other supply issues. The result was that soldiers would often go days without a ration. They would get a little flour and maybe some meat, and often the meat is pretty bad. In 1775, Congress determined a uniform ration that included 1 pound of beef, or 3/4 of a pound of pork, or 1 pound of salted fish, and 1 pound of flour or bread per day, 3 pounds of peas or beans per week, 1 pint of milk per day, 1 pint of rice per week, 1 quart of spruce beer or cider per day, and a little molasses. Vinegar was later added. Because army leaders were rarely able to deliver, soldiers would beg from civilians and supplement with whatever animals they could find. Congress pressured Washington to seize food, paid for with low-value paper currency, but General Washington worried the practice would alienate the colonials. How army rations helped change food. Soldiers may find themselves a long way from the comforts of a kitchen, but they always have to eat. When soldiers go into the field, they carry with them tiny miracles of engineering. And we're not just talking about weaponry. Some very technical and forward-thinking research has gone into military meals. They must be light and easy to carry, capable of staying edible even after weeks in the hot sun, supply the surprisingly high number of calories that soldiers in the field need, often more than 4,000 a day. And of course, not cost the taxpayer an inordinate amount. That has led to some clever tricks of science that have even made their way into the goods you may find on your shopping list. One of the most interesting items in army rations from an innovation perspective is the bread, says writer Anastasia Marx de Salcedo, author of the book Combat Ready Kitchen. Freshly baked bread begins going stale the moment it comes out of the oven, as strands of a starch called amylose spread all throughout its structure and start to harden. Amylose can be snipped up by enzymes called amylases, but these are denatured by heat as the bread cooks, hence the generally unappealing razor-to-the-gums qualities of a baguette after a few days. In the mid-20th century, however, it was discovered that adding amylases that stand up to heat changed the equation. These enzymes, which come from heat-tolerant bacteria, kept right on snipping after baking, keeping bread almost eerily soft and flexible, and giving it a long shelf life. Bread treated this way eventually made it into pouches in military rations. Similar bread also arrived, you might be surprised to hear, in your supermarket. Almost all bread in grocery stores today has bacterial amylases working to keep it squishy for the long term, as private industries have commercialized the insights of earlier researchers. Military research is also behind today's packets of dry active yeast. The roles of water, salt and sugar in food preservation. Another interesting bit of army ration chemistry involves a concept called water activity. A moist food is a much friendlier place for bacteria and mold than a dry one, to be sure. Just put a nice wheel of brie and a brittle corn chip out to ripen and see which goes first. But what truly matters for extending shelf life is not a food's absolute moisture content, but rather how many of those water molecules are floating around unattached to anything else. Those are the ones that can become food safety troublemakers, causing spoilage. It turns out that food doesn't need to be dried to the point of mummification to last. All that needs to happen is that the water activity, as this quality is called, needs to be brought down into a certain range. The US military and NASA helped fund important early work in the mid-20th century into manipulating water activity to keep food fresh for long periods of time. It allowed food scientists to suddenly be able to create moist-seeming foods that were hostile to life, at least microbiological life. Adding salt and sugar to foods ties up the water molecules without making the food seem dry. Furthermore, keeping a crisp cracker and a moist cheese together in a bag for years, without the crackers losing their crunch or the cheese drying out, is possible as long as they each have the same water activity. In that case, the water won't migrate between the two. It's a technique that's applied in consumer foods as well as in field rations. Lately, there's another innovation facilitated by the military that has been making its way to the rest of the world. Cooking food by applying high pressure instead of heat. Under high pressure, microorganisms burst and the food is sterilized, a process that today yields preservative-free lunch meats, packaged guacamole that stays green under its wrapper, and fresh-tasting bottled juices. The process is sometimes called cold pasteurization. Walking down the aisles of the grocery store, you will see many packaged goods with roots in science developed for a different purpose, and not just from the modern era. Even the humble can has military origins. During the Napoleonic Wars, the French government called for a way to preserve food for soldiers over the long term, and canning, albeit in sealed glass jars, was born. It's an odd state of affairs, to be sure, this creep from the battlefield to the supermarket, but its effects have been substantial. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.